The lunch rush had taken over Bennett's diner. Plates clattered. Orders flew from the kitchen. Customers filled every table. The smell of grilled steak and fresh bread drifted through the crowded restaurant to everyone inside. It looked like another successful afternoon, but nobody noticed the man standing quietly near the entrance. 43-year-old Thomas Bennett adjusted the collar of his faded work shirt and looked around. A small smile touched his face, because 10 years earlier, this place had been nothing more than a dream built from grief, sacrifice, and a promise. After losing his wife Rachel to cancer, Thomas had been left alone to raise their young daughter Ava. Money was scarce. Life was brutal. Some nights he worked 3 jobs, construction during the day, deliveries at night, cleaning offices after midnight. Every dollar went towards survival. But Rachel had always dreamed of opening a family restaurant, a place where nobody felt like a stranger, a place where kindness mattered more than money. Before she passed away, she made Thomas promise, "One day you'll build it." For years, the promise felt impossible. Then slowly, pain turned into determination. A food truck became a small diner. The diner became a restaurant. The restaurant became 3 locations across Chicago. Today, Bennett's Diner was one of the most beloved family restaurants in the city. But very few employees knew who Thomas really was. That was intentional. Thomas hated attention. He never hung photos of himself, never bragged, never walked around acting like an owner. Most new staff members assumed he was simply another maintenance worker. And Thomas preferred it that way because people revealed their true character when they didn't know who was watching. That afternoon, Thomas arrived unexpectedly. The downtown location had recently hired several new managers. Customer complaints had started increasing. Nothing major, just enough to concern him. So he decided to visit quietly. No announcements, no executive meeting, no warning. Just observation. As he stepped inside, a young hostess glanced up. Her name tag read Chelsea. She looked barely 22. Polished uniform, perfect smile, perfect attitude, at least initially. "Table for one?" she asked. Thomas nodded. Chelsea looked him up and down. The worn boots, the faded shirt, the old pickup truck visible through the front window. Something in her expression changed. She grabbed a tablet. Fully booked. Thomas looked around. Half a dozen tables sat empty. "Oh," he pointed gently. "What about those?" Chelsea didn't even glance over. "Reserved. Every single one." Before Thomas could respond, a luxury SUV stopped outside. Chelsea's face brightened. 3 well-dressed businessmen entered. Expensive suits, designer watches, confident smiles. Without checking anything, Chelsea grabbed menus. "Right this way, gentlemen." She seated them at one of the supposedly reserved tables. Thomas watched quietly. Interesting. Very interesting. A few moments later, another customer entered, an elderly woman using a cane. Her hands trembled slightly. She looked tired. "Chelsea, dear," the woman asked softly, "do you have a small table available?" The hostess sighed dramatically. "We're very busy." The elderly woman glanced toward the empty seats. "Oh, I understand." She turned to leave. Then Thomas stood. "Ma'am." The woman looked back. "You can have my place." She smiled sadly. "But you don't have one." Thomas smiled. "Exactly." The woman laughed softly. The interaction lasted less than 30 seconds, but several nearby customers noticed, including a waiter named Marco. Marco frowned because, unlike Chelsea, he knew exactly who Thomas was. The owner, the founder, the man whose values built everything. Marco immediately approached. "Mr. Bennett." Thomas raised a finger. "Not yet." Marco understood. Thomas wanted to keep watching, so he stepped back. Another hour passed, and things only got worse. One family waited 25 minutes while empty tables remained unused. A delivery driver was treated rudely. A young server was publicly humiliated by an assistant manager. Again and again, the same pattern appeared. Status determined service, appearance determined respect, money determined kindness. Everything Rachel would have hated. Everything Thomas built this restaurant to avoid. Finally, the breaking point arrived. A tired single mother entered with 2 young children. The youngest looked hungry. The older child clutched her mother's hand tightly. The woman approached the host stand. "Excuse me? Can we sit near the window? It's empty." Chelsea barely looked up. "Reserved." The mother nodded, then quietly asked, "Can my children share one meal?" Chelsea's expression hardened. Comfort policy doesn't allow that. It was a lie. Complete lie. Thomas created the exact opposite policy because he remembered being broke. He remembered choosing between rent and food. He remembered feeding Ava while pretending he wasn't hungry. The mother lowered her eyes. "Okay." She turned toward the door. One child whispered, "Mommy, I'm hungry." The words hit Thomas like a punch. Suddenly he stood. The entire restaurant seemed to pause. He walked toward the host stand. Chelsea looked annoyed. "Sir, if you're waiting for a table." "No." Thomas Thomas's voice remained calm. "I'm done waiting." Something about his tone made nearby employees stop moving. The assistant manager approached. "Is there a problem?" Thomas nodded. "Yes." He pointed toward the departing family. "Seat them." The manager frowned. "Who are you to tell me what to do?" Silence. Marco closed his eyes. Several veteran employees looked nervous because they knew exactly what was coming. Thomas reached into his pocket, pulled out an old leather wallet, and placed a small silver key on the counter. At first, nobody understood. Then the assistant manager froze. The restaurant logo was engraved into the key. Recognition flooded his face. His skin turned pale. "Oh no!" Chelsea looked confused. "What?" The manager whispered. "That's him." "What?" The manager stared at Thomas. "Owner." The word spread instantly. *owner, owner, *. Every employee stopped moving. Every conversation faded. Chelsea felt her stomach drop. "No." Thomas looked around the restaurant, at the customers, the staff, the empty tables. Then he spoke quietly, but every word carried weight. "Years ago, I built this place because I knew what it felt like to be judged. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. My daughter and I once shared a single meal because that's all we could afford." Tears filled the eyes of the single mother near the door. "I promised nobody would ever feel small inside my restaurant." His gaze settled on Chelsea. "Today they did." Silence became unbearable. Chelsea's hands trembled. The assistant manager looked sick. Thomas wasn't angry, and that somehow made it worse, because disappointment cuts deeper than rage. Finally, he walked toward the single mother, pulled out a chair, and personally seated her family. Then he knelt beside her children. "Order anything you'd like." The little boy blinked. "Anything?" Thomas smiled. "Anything." The child grinned. The mother began crying. Around the restaurant, customers watched silently, some recording, some emotional, all understanding they were witnessing something important. Then Thomas stood, turned back toward the staff, and said words nobody would ever forget. "Today wasn't a failure because mistakes were made." He paused. "It was a failure because kindness was forgotten." And at that moment, every employee realized something. They weren't about to lose their jobs because the owner walked in. They were about to face something much harder: the man who built the restaurant and the standards they had completely abandoned.